The oil lamp flickered against the train window as June Bennett pressed herself against the wooden seat, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The acrid smell of coal smoke filled the passenger car, while the rhythmic clatter of wheels on steel rails counted down the seconds to her freedom or her death. Behind her, Henry Greer's heavy footsteps echoed through the swaying car, each step a promise of the violence she'd endured for 3 hellish years. "June, darling, where are you hiding?" Henry's voice carried that sickening sweet tone that always preceded his fists. "You know you can't run from me. You're mine, remember, till death do us part." The memory of Margaret Collins flashed through June's mind, sweet, innocent Margaret, who'd tried to escape Henry's network 6 months ago. They'd found her body in the East River, branded and broken. But there had been whispers in the Lucky Strike saloon back in New York, drunk men talking carelessly about women who vanished without a trace, about ships heading west with cargo that wasn't listed in any manifest. June's fingers trembled as she gripped the brass door handle of the train car. The wind howled outside, carrying the promise of the Colorado wilderness that lay ahead. Dust Valley, Luke Sawyer. A new life if she could survive the next few minutes. The train lurched around a curve, and June saw her chance. Henry stumbled, catching himself against a seat, as other passengers murmured in concern. June threw her weight against the stubborn door, her torn dress catching on the metal handle. The door wouldn't budge. Panic rose in her throat like bile. "There you are, my beautiful wife." Henry's shadow fell across her, and she could smell the whiskey on his breath, mixed with that cologne that had once seemed sophisticated, but now reeked of violence and broken promises. "Did you really think you could leave me after everything I've done for you?" June's foot found the door's bottom panel, and she kicked with desperate strength. The door flew open, revealing the black Colorado night rushing past at deadly speed. Wind whipped her auburn hair across her face as she turned to face Henry one last time. "No, I'd rather die than belong to you for another minute," she shouted over the roar of wind and wheels. Henry lunged forward, his fingers grazing her wrist, but June was already falling into the darkness. The ground rushed up to meet her, and the world exploded into pain before everything went black. Dawn painted the Colorado sky in shades of rose and gold when June finally opened her eyes. Her body ached from head to toe, but somehow she was alive. Tall grass surrounded her, swaying gently in the morning breeze. In the distance, she could see smoke rising from a chimney, and beyond that, the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains stood guard over the valley, like ancient sentinels. As consciousness fully returned, June felt a familiar weight in her chest, not just the physical pain of her fall, but the deeper ache of years spent in fear. Her mother's voice echoed from memory, words spoken on a deathbed years ago. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, June. It's choosing to do what's right, even when you're terrified." June had carried those words through every beating, every threat, every moment. When giving up seemed easier than fighting. Now, lying broken in the Colorado grass, she felt their truth more powerfully than ever. The letter from Luke Sawyer crinkled in her dress pocket. Somehow it had survived the fall along with her. With shaking legs, she stood and began walking toward what she hoped was Dust Valley. Each step a choice between her old life and whatever lay ahead. Luke Sawyer was mending a fence when he saw the woman stumbling across his pasture. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled with grass and dirt. But there was something in the way. She held herself a desperate dignity that spoke to something deep in his chest. He'd been expecting June Bennett on the afternoon train, but here she was at sunrise looking like she'd wrestled with the devil himself. "Ma'am." Luke approached slowly the way he would a spooked horse. "Are you June Bennett?" June looked up at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, and Luke felt something shift in his world. This wasn't the demure mail-order bride he'd been expecting. This was a survivor. "I am," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "And you must be Luke Sawyer. I apologize for my appearance." The journey was more difficult than anticipated. Luke noticed the bruises on her wrists, the way she flinched when he moved too quickly. Someone had hurt this woman, hurt her badly. The protective instinct that had gotten him into trouble more than once flared to life. "No apologies needed," he said gently. "Let's get you inside. Sarah Burke, the sheriff's wife, can tend to those scrapes." As Luke helped June toward his modest ranch house, neither of them noticed the man watching from the ridge overlooking the valley. Henry Greer had survived the train's emergency stop and tracked June through the night. His face bore fresh scratches from his own tumble, but his eyes burned with the cold fury of a man who'd never learned to accept defeat. The Sawyer ranch house was simple, but clean built from local timber, with a wide porch that faced the morning sun. June had imagined this moment so many times during the dark nights in New York, walking into a real home where no one would raise a hand to her in anger. But now, standing in Luke's modest parlor, she felt only numbness. "The bedroom's through there." Luke said, his voice careful and respectful. "I'll sleep in the barn until we figure things out proper." June studied his face, weathered from sun and wind, with eyes the color of winter sky. There was kindness there, but also pain. Luke Sawyer carried his own ghosts. "That's not necessary," June said. "I won't be. I can't." She stopped, unable to voice the fears that crowded her throat. "I understand," Luke said simply. "We'll take this slow, June. Whatever happened to you before, it ain't happening here." That afternoon, Sheriff David Burke arrived with his wife Sarah, a plump woman with gentle hands and eyes that missed nothing. While Sarah tended to June's cuts and bruises, Burke questioned Luke about the woman's arrival. "She says she fell from the train." Burke said, his voice carefully neutral. "That's quite a fall to survive." "People survive all kinds of things." Luke replied, something defensive in his tone. "What matters is she's here now and safe." Burke nodded slowly. He'd known Luke for 5 years, ever since the man had arrived in Dust Valley with haunted eyes and a reluctance to talk about his past. Good men often carried the heaviest burdens. "There's talk in town about strangers asking questions," Burke said quietly. "Man with fancy clothes and New York manners. Says he's looking for his wife." Luke's hand moved instinctively to the Colt at his hip. "His wife. Claims she ran off, stole money from him. Says she's not right in the head, needs doctoring." Burke's eyes were steady on Luke's face. "Of course, we both know how some men define not right in the head when it comes to their women folk." Through the bedroom door, they could hear Sarah's gentle voice. "Now, don't you worry, dear," she was saying. "I've seen plenty of women come through hard times. The important thing is you're here now and you're safe." June's voice was barely audible in response, but Luke caught the thread of fear that ran through every word. "I keep thinking he'll find me. He always said he would no matter where I went." "Well, he hasn't met the women of Dust Valley yet," Sarah said with a hint of steel in her voice. "We look after our own here. Alice Morrison, she runs the boarding house with her Uncle George. She came here running from a bad situation, too. Now she's one of our strongest voices for women who need help. You'll meet her soon enough." "This man leave a name?" Luke asked Burke quietly. "Henry Greer. Says he'll be staying at Morrison's boarding house until his wife is found." Burke's expression was troubled. "Luke, I've seen enough beaten women to know the signs. If she's running from him, she's got good reason. Then we make sure he doesn't find her." Burke was quiet for a long moment. "That might not be as simple as you think. Man like that with money and influence. He's got ways of making trouble for folks who get in his way." Luke's jaw tightened. "Let him try." That evening, as June sat on the porch watching the sun set over the Colorado mountains, Luke brought her a cup of coffee and settled into the chair beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of cattle and crickets. "I haven't thanked you," June said finally. No need for thanks. This is your home now for as long as you want it. June turned to study his profile. Why did you send for a mail-order bride, Luke, a man like you? Surely there are women in town who'd be happy to marry you? Luke was quiet so long, June thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. I had a family once. Wife, little girl. They were killed 3 years ago while I was away on business. Raiders hit our place outside Denver. He paused, his hands tightening on his coffee cup. I couldn't save them because I wasn't there. Thought maybe if I married again, had someone to protect, maybe I could make up for failing them. June felt tears sting her eyes. That's not your fault, Luke. Maybe not, but guilt ain't always logical. He looked at her then, and June saw the depth of his pain. What about you? What made you answer my letter? June's hand moved unconsciously to her ribs, where Henry's latest beating had left her gasping on the floor. I thought I was going to die if I stayed. My stepfather. He wasn't a good man. When he died, I thought I was free. But then I met Henry, and he was so charming, so kind. By the time I saw who he really was, it was too late. It's not too late now, Luke said firmly. Whatever he did to you, however he hurt you, it's over. You're safe here. June wanted to believe him, but Henry's words echoed in her memory. You can run to the ends of the earth, darling, but I'll always find you. You're mine forever. 3 days passed peacefully. June helped with household chores, slowly growing comfortable in Luke's presence. He was nothing like Henry. He moved slowly around, spoke softly, never raised his voice, even when dealing with stubborn cattle or broken equipment. But June couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Her fears proved justified on Thursday evening. Luke was in the barn checking on a sick horse when June heard the soft creak of footsteps on the porch. Through the kitchen window, she saw a familiar silhouette that made her blood turn to ice. Henry stood at the front door, still wearing his expensive suit, but now rumpled and stained from travel. His face bore the scratches from his own fall from the train, but his smile was as cold and beautiful as ever. "Hello, June," he said as she opened the door with trembling hands. "Did you miss me?" "You can't be here," June whispered. "This is my home now." "Your home." Henry laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Darling, your home is wherever I say it is. Now gather your things. We're leaving." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Henry's smile never wavered, but his hand moved to his jacket where June knew he kept a small pistol. "I think you are my dear. Unless you want your new protector to suffer the same fate as sweet Margaret Collins." The mention of Margaret's name hit June like a physical blow. Margaret, who'd tried to escape Henry's network and paid the ultimate price. "That's right," Henry said, seeing her face. "I remember how fond you were of little Margaret. Such a pity what happened to her. These western towns can be so dangerous for young women traveling alone." From the barn came the sound of Luke moving around, still unaware of the danger. June made a desperate calculation. If she went with Henry now, Luke would be safe. If she refused, "I need a moment to get my things," she said. "Of course, darling. But don't take too long." And June. Henry's voice dropped to the silky whisper she remembered from their worst nights together. "If you try to warn your cowboy friend, I'll kill him slow, just like I did the others who got in my way." June moved toward the bedroom, her mind racing. In the drawer of the bedside table, Luke kept a loaded Derringer, if she could reach it. But as she turned, Henry's hand closed on her wrist with bruising force. Ah, he said. "I know how your mind works, darling. You always were too clever for your own good." The front door burst open, and Luke stood framed in the doorway, his Colt drawn and pointed at Henry's chest. June had never seen such cold fury on a human face. "Take your hands off her," Luke said, his voice deadly quiet. Henry turned, still holding June's wrist, and smiled. You must be the famous Luke Sawyer. I'm Henry Greer, June's husband. I've come to take my wife home. She's not your wife anymore, Luke said. And she's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. Oh, but she is, Henry said pleasantly. You see, June and I have an understanding. Don't we, darling? June's voice came out as barely a whisper. Luke, he'll kill you. He's killed others who... Henry's grip tightened, making her gasp. June tends to exaggerate. The poor dear has such an active imagination. Luke took a step forward, and Henry's free hand moved to his concealed pistol. I wouldn't if I were you. You see, I have friends in this territory. Important friends. Sheriff Burke, for instance, is surprisingly amenable to reasonable conversation when properly motivated. June saw doubt flicker across Luke's face. Henry had always been a master manipulator, turning allies against each other with lies and bribes and threats. Don't listen to him, June said desperately. He's lying about Sheriff Burke. He lies about everything. Do I? Henry's smile widened. Ask your protector here about his past, June. Ask him about the Cartwright Express Company. Ask him how many women he helped deliver to men like me without ever questioning where they were going or why they screamed. Luke's face went white. That's not... I didn't know. Didn't you? Henry's voice was silk over steel. The company paid you well to ask no questions, didn't they? To simply deliver your cargo and collect your money. June saw the horror dawning in Luke's eyes, the terrible recognition of unwitting complicity. Henry had found Luke's weakness, the guilt that already ate at him like poison. You see, darling, Henry said to June, your knight in shining armor isn't so different from me after all. We've both profited from women's suffering. Now that's enough, a new voice said from the doorway. Sheriff Burke stood there, his own gun drawn, but June couldn't tell who he was aiming at. Nobody move. Henry's smile never wavered. Sheriff Burke, how good of you to join us. I trust you've given thought to our earlier conversation. Burke's jaw was tight, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Release the woman, Greer. I'm afraid I can't do that, Sheriff. June is my wife, and I have legal documents proving it. Unless, of course, you want certain information about your gambling debts to reach the territorial government. June watched Burke's face crumble. Henry had trapped them all, just as he'd trapped her years ago. His network of corruption reached further than she'd imagined. Please, she whispered to Luke. Just let me go with him. Don't let anyone else die because of me. But Luke straightened something hard, settling in his eyes. No, I failed to protect my family once. I won't fail again. The room exploded into violence. Luke dove left as Henry's gun cleared its holster. Sheriff Burke shouted a warning. June threw herself toward the kitchen away from the crossfire. Gunshots boomed in the small room, deafeningly loud. When the smoke cleared, Henry stood over Luke's still form, his gun smoking in his hand. Sheriff Burke lay crumpled near the door, clutching his shoulder. June's scream echoed off the walls. Luke. She crawled toward him, but Henry's boot planted itself in her path. He's not dead, Henry said casually. Yet. But he will be if you don't come with me right now. Choose quickly, darling. I'm not a patient man. Luke stirred blood seeping through his shirt where Henry's bullet had found its mark. His eyes found June's, and she saw him mouth a single word. Run. June looked at the man who'd shown her kindness, who'd offered her a home, and protection, who was now bleeding because of her past. Then she looked at Henry, beautiful and terrible, and utterly without mercy. I'll come, she said. But first let me stop his bleeding. How touching. Very well, but be quick about it. June knelt beside Luke, pressing her hands to his wound. Under cover of tending to him, she whispered desperately, There's a place called Devil's Bluff. 3 miles north, if you can make it there. Luke's hand closed briefly over hers, letting her know he'd heard. As June stood, she palmed the derringer from his boot, hiding it in the folds of her skirt. Touching farewell, Henry said. Now come along, darling. We have associates to meet. As Henry led June out into the night, neither of them saw Emma Burke slip away from her hiding place behind the woodshed. The sheriff's 16-year-old daughter had witnessed everything, and now she ran through the darkness toward town, her heart pounding with fear and determination. Emma burst into Morrison's boarding house just as the other guests were settling down for the evening. George Morrison, a bear of a man with graying hair and kind eyes, looked up from his newspaper in alarm. Beside him sat his niece Alice, a quiet woman with prematurely gray hair and scars on her hands that spoke of their own story of survival. "Emma, what in tarnation?" George began. "Mr. Morrison, we need help." Emma gasped. "That man, Henry Greer, he shot Luke Sawyer and took Mrs. Bennett Papa's hurt too." Alice Morrison rose from her chair, her face pale but determined. "Emma, slow down. Tell us exactly what happened." As Emma recounted the scene at the Sawyer ranch, Alice's expression grew increasingly grim. She recognized the pattern, the smooth-talking stranger, the threats, the systematic isolation of the victim. "I know this type of man," Alice said quietly to her uncle. "When I ran from my husband in Kansas, there were others like him. They work together, share information. It's not just about one woman, it's about control." George Morrison's face darkened. "Which way did they go, Emma?" "North toward Devil's Bluff. Mr. Morrison, there's something else. That man, he's got some kind of hold over Papa. Something about gambling debts." Alice stepped forward. "I'll go with you, Uncle George. I know how these men think, how they operate." "Alice, no, it's too dangerous." "It's dangerous for all of us if we let him succeed," Alice replied firmly. "Emma, I need you to ride to the telegraph office. Send word to Marshal Garrett in Denver. Tell him we need help with a kidnapping and human trafficking. Can you do that?" Emma nodded, her young face set with determination. "What about Luke and Mrs. Bennett?" "We're going after them," George said, already gathering supplies. "With luck, they'll hold out until help arrives." As Emma ran toward the telegraph office, Alice turned to her uncle. "There's something you should know. When I was running from my husband, I heard stories about men like Greer. They don't work alone. There's a whole network of them moving women around like property." George's jaw tightened. Devil's Bluff was dangerous territory. Old mining claims honeycombed the area with unstable tunnels and abandoned shafts. It was the last place anyone should go at night, especially with a violent man like Henry Greer. Henry's horse picked its way carefully through the rocky terrain leading to Devil's Bluff, June seated in front of him, his arm around her waist like a steel band. She could feel the derringer pressed against her leg, but with Henry so close, she couldn't risk drawing it. "You're wondering why we're going this way," Henry said conversationally. "Truth is, darling, I have associates waiting at the train station. Associates who don't ask questions about damaged goods." June's blood chilled. "What associates?" "The same ones who helped me acquire Sweet Margaret and all the others. There's quite a market for broken women in the territories, June. Men who enjoy the challenge of retraining stubborn wives." The casual way he spoke of trafficking women made June's stomach revolt. "You're insane. I'm a businessman," Henry corrected. "And you, my dear, are about to become a very profitable investment." They reached the base of Devil's Bluff as the moon rose over the jagged peaks. The old mining road was treacherous in daylight. At night it was a death trap of loose rocks and hidden pitfalls. But Henry seemed to know the way, guiding his horse with confidence toward a cluster of abandoned buildings. "We'll wait here until dawn," he said, dismounting and pulling June down beside him. "My associates will collect you then, and I'll be on my way to find my next bride. Perhaps that pretty little sheriff's daughter. Emma, wasn't it?" June's terror crystallized into rage. "Don't you dare touch her." "Oh, I won't have to. She'll come to me willingly when she learns what happened to her father. You see, dear David Burke won't be testifying about my business activities." Henry dragged June toward one of the old mining shacks, but as they approached, a voice called out from the darkness. "That's far enough, Greer." Luke Sawyer stepped into the moonlight, his shirt bloody but his gun steady in his hand. Behind him came Sheriff Burke, pale but determined, and George Morrison carrying a rifle. Alice Morrison emerged from the shadows, her own weapon trained on Henry. Henry's arm tightened around June's throat. How touching. The wounded heroes come to rescue their damsel. Unfortunately, gentlemen and lady, you're too late. Henry's gun appeared at June's temple, and she felt the cold metal press against her skin. Around them, the night was filled with the sound of shifting rock and distant creaks from the unstable mine structures. "Let her go, Greer?" Burke said, his voice strained but authoritative. "You're surrounded." "Am I?" Henry laughed. "I count 4 of you, 1 wounded, 1 old one bought and paid for sheriff, and 1 woman who should know better than to interfere in men's business." Alice Morrison's voice was steady and cold. "I know exactly what kind of business you're in, Greer. The same business my husband was in before I put a bullet in him." Henry's confidence flickered for the first time. "You're bluffing. Try me," Alice said simply. Luke took a careful step forward. "You made a mistake coming here, Greer. This isn't New York. Out here we take care of our own." "Do you? And how exactly did you take care of your wife and daughter, Mr. Sawyer?" "Oh, that's right. You weren't there when they needed you." Luke's hand trembled slightly, but his gun never wavered. "You're right. I wasn't there when they needed me. But I'm here now." Henry's laugh was cut short by the sound of hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. A new voice called out from the darkness. "Federal Marshal, drop your weapons." Marshal Thomas Garrett emerged from the shadows, his badge glinting in the moonlight. Behind him rode 3 deputy marshals, all armed and ready. Emma's message had reached him just in time. Henry's confidence finally cracked. "This is impossible. You couldn't have gotten word to Denver so quickly. The telegraph is a wonderful invention." Garrett said dryly, "Henry Greer, you're under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, and murder. Release the woman." Henry's grip on June tightened. "I don't think so, Marshal. You see, I have insurance." He began backing toward the mouth of an old mine shaft, dragging June with him. "Anyone follows me and the woman dies. I know these tunnels, gentlemen. Do you?" Before anyone could stop him, Henry pulled June into the dark mouth of the mine. The entrance swallowed them up, leaving the rescue party staring into impenetrable blackness. "Damn," Garrett muttered. "Morrison, what do you know about these mines?" "They're a death trap," Morrison said grimly. "Unstable tunnels, old dynamite charges that never went off, underground springs that flood the lower levels. The Ute won't even go near this place. They say it's cursed." Luke was already moving toward the mine entrance. "I'm going after them." "Luke, wait," Burke called. "In your condition, my condition is my problem," Luke said flatly. "That woman is in there because of me. I'm bringing her out." Alice Morrison stepped forward. "I'm going with you. I know how men like Greer think." Inside the mine, Henry dragged June deeper into the tunnels by the light of a stolen lantern. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old timber and stagnant water. Support beams creaked ominously overhead, and more than once they had to step carefully over gaps in the floor where the planking had rotted away. "Where are we going?" June gasped. "There's an old mining camp deeper in," Henry said. "My associates use it as a staging point. We'll wait there until the marshals give up and go home." June's hand closed around the derringer hidden in her skirt. If she could just find the right moment. "Don't even think about it," Henry said, noticing her movement. "I know you have Luke's little gun, darling. Such a predictable man, hiding weapons in obvious places. Henry stopped, suddenly cocking his head to listen. From behind them came the sound of footsteps and voices. Their pursuers had entered the mine. "This way," Henry hissed, pulling June down a side tunnel that sloped steeply downward. As they descended, June could hear the sound of running water growing louder. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, lit by phosphorescent minerals in the walls. An underground stream ran through the center of the space, its waters black as ink in the dim light. On the far side of the stream stood a cluster of ramshackle buildings, the abandoned mining camp Henry had mentioned. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Henry said. "My associates chose well. No one would ever think to look for missing women in a place like this." As they crossed a narrow wooden bridge over the stream, June saw something that made her heart stop. Carved into the walls of the cavern were names, dozens of them. Names of women with dates beside them. Some of the dates were recent. "My memorial wall," Henry said, following her gaze. "Every successful transaction deserves to be remembered." June saw Margaret Collins' name among the others, and her grief turned to white-hot rage. Without thinking, she drove her elbow back into Henry's ribs and broke free from his grip. "June," Luke's voice echoed from the tunnel entrance. He'd found them. Henry cursed and grabbed for her, but June was already running toward the sound of Luke's voice. Behind her, Henry's gun barked and rock chips exploded from the cavern wall, inches from her head. Luke appeared at the tunnel mouth with Burke Morrison Alice and Marshall Garrett close behind. Seeing June running toward him with Henry in pursuit, Luke raised his gun and fired. His bullet took Henry in the shoulder, spinning him around, but the man kept his feet. "Stay back." Henry shouted, his gun wavering between June and her rescuers. "One more step and I'll bring this whole place down." He gestured to the cavern's ceiling, and June saw what he meant. Old dynamite charges were still embedded in the rock, their fuses dark with age, but potentially still active. Henry's free hand found a flint and steel in his pocket. "You're insane," Burke said. "You'll kill us all, including yourself." "Maybe," Henry said, his face twisted with pain and madness. "But if I can't have June, no one can." The cavern filled with the sound of rushing footsteps as the deputy marshals arrived. Henry's eyes darted frantically between the growing number of armed men surrounding him. "Last chance, darling," he called to June. "Come to me now, or we all die together." June looked at Luke, saw the pain and determination in his eyes, the way he held his wounded body upright through sheer will. She thought of Margaret Collins and all the other women whose names were carved into Henry's memorial wall. She thought of Emma Burke, innocent and brave, who might be Henry's next victim if he escaped. "No," June said firmly. "I'll never come to you again." Henry's face contorted with rage. He struck the flint and sparks flew toward the nearest fuse. But before the flame could catch, a new voice rang out from the shadows of the mining camp. "Henry Greer." A woman stepped into the light, thin-scarred, but very much alive. June gasped in recognition. "Margaret." Margaret Collins held a rifle trained on Henry's chest. "Hello, June." "Hello, Henry. Surprised to see me." Henry's face went white. "You're dead. I killed you myself." "You killed a woman who looked like me," Margaret said coldly. "Sarah Patterson, may she rest in peace. You were so eager to make an example that you didn't bother to make sure you had the right victim." Henry's hand shook as he tried to relight the flint. "This is impossible. I saw your body. You saw what I wanted you to see. I've been tracking you for months, Henry. Learning about your network, gathering evidence. The marshals have warrants for a dozen of your associates now." Marshal Garrett stepped forward. "Miss Collins has been working with us for the past 6 months. Her testimony will put you away forever, Greer." Henry's composure finally shattered completely. With a scream of rage, he flung the lit flint toward the dynamite charges and dove toward June, his gun swinging up to fire. But as he lunged, the old wooden bridge beneath his feet gave way with a groaning crack. Henry plunged into the black waters of the underground stream, his scream cut short by the icy current that swept him away into the depths. The flint had done its work, though. Ancient fuses sparked to life, and the cavern began to shake as the first charges detonated. But only one section of the ceiling came down the area directly over the stream where Henry had fallen, sealing his watery grave forever. Luke reached June first, pulling her away from the collapsing section. Around them, the others were already moving toward the tunnel entrance as dust and debris rained down from above. "Is everyone all right?" Marshal Garrett called out. As they counted heads and checked for injuries, June found herself looking back at the names carved into the cavern wall, Margaret's name among them, but now with a new meaning. Not a memorial to the dead, but a testament to the survived. "It's over," Luke said softly, his arms tightening around her. "He can't hurt you anymore. He can't hurt anyone anymore." Margaret Collins approached them, her scarred face showing the first genuine smile June had seen from her in years. "June, I'm sorry I couldn't warn you sooner, but we had to make sure we could round up his entire network. You saved us all," June said. "Every woman he might have hurt in the future, you saved them too." As they made their way out of the mine, Alice Morrison walked beside June. "What will you do now?" she asked quietly. June thought about the question. For 3 years, her life had been defined by fear, by running, by surviving. Now, for the first time, she could think about living. "I want to help," she said. "Other women like us, like Margaret. We shouldn't have to face this alone." Alice smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." 6 months later, June stood in the parlor of what had once been Morrison's boarding house, now transformed into the Dust Valley Women's Aid Society. The building bustled with activity, women learning to read and write, others training as nurses or seamstresses, children playing safely in the garden behind the house. The walls were decorated, not with Henry's macabre memorial, but with something far more powerful: photographs of women and children who had found new lives, letters of gratitude, and a large map showing the locations of similar aid societies that had been established across the territory. Luke found her there reviewing the letters that arrived daily from women seeking help and safety. His shoulder had healed well, leaving only a small scar to remind them of that terrible night. More importantly, the guilt that had haunted him for years had begun to lift. Working alongside June and the other women, teaching children to read, helping families start new lives, it had given him a purpose beyond his past failures. Another request from Denver. June said, holding up a letter. "A woman named Alice Morrison, any relation to George?" "His great-niece," Luke said. "George mentioned she was having trouble with her husband. Looks like she's found the courage to leave." June added the letter to the growing pile. In 6 months, the Aid Society had helped 63 women and children escape abusive situations and start new lives. Some stayed in Dust Valley, others moved on to find family or opportunity elsewhere, but all left stronger than they'd arrived. "Sheriff Burke stopped by," Luke said. "The last of Greer's associates was sentenced yesterday. 20 years in territorial prison." June nodded. David Burke had redeemed himself admirably, working tirelessly to bring Henry's accomplices to justice, despite the corruption that had nearly destroyed his career. The gambling debts that Henry had used against him were now a thing of the past, paid off through the reward money for helping break up the trafficking ring. Margaret's coming for dinner tonight," June said. "She has news about the investigation in Kansas." Margaret Collins had become the territory's most effective agent for tracking human trafficking networks. Her intimate knowledge of how the criminals operated made her invaluable to law enforcement, and her survival gave hope to other victims. Emma Burke appeared in the doorway, now 18, and one of June's most dedicated volunteers. "Mrs. Sawyer, there's a woman here with her children. She says she got your letter." June smiled at the title. She and Luke had married quietly 2 months ago, a simple ceremony that had become one of Dust Valley's most beloved traditions. The whole town had participated, with Sarah Burke providing the cake, Alice Morrison handling the decorations, and even the local Ute tribe sending representatives with a traditional blessing for long life and happiness. It was during the wedding preparations that June had learned about Dust Valley's most unique tradition and the blessing of new beginnings, a ceremony held each spring, where the entire community gathered to honor those who had overcome hardship and started fresh lives. It was a tradition that predated the town itself, born from the survivors of Indian raids, mining disasters, and harsh winters, who had learned that strength came not from avoiding adversity, but from supporting each other through it. "Send her to the blue room, Emma. Make sure she and the children get something to eat." As Emma hurried away, Luke slipped his arm around June's waist. "You've built something amazing here." "We've built it," June corrected. "This place exists because people like you and Margaret and the Burkes decided that women deserve better than fear." Sarah Burke emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of tea and cookies for the new arrivals. At 62, she had found new purpose as the Aid Society's unofficial mother figure, providing comfort and wisdom to women making the difficult transition to independence. "Now that new woman," Sarah said quietly, "she's got the same look you had when you first arrived, June. Scared, but determined. Alice is with her now, telling her story." Through the open door, they could hear Alice Morrison's gentle voice. "I came here 3 years ago with nothing but the clothes on my back and a black eye that wouldn't heal. My husband had convinced everyone in town that I was crazy, that I made up stories about his violence. But Uncle George believed me, and this community gave me a chance to start over." A younger voice responded, tentative but curious. "What did you do? How did you become strong again?" "One day at a time," Alice replied. "One choice at a time. And with the help of women who understood because they'd been where I was. You're not alone anymore. That's the most important thing to remember." Luke was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the women working in the garden, their faces peaceful in the afternoon sun. "Do you ever regret it, leaving New York, coming west?" June thought of that terrifying night on the train, of jumping into the darkness, not knowing if she would live or die. She thought of Margaret Collins and all the other women who'd found the courage to break free from their prisons. "Never," she said firmly. "That jump from the train was the first free choice I'd made in years. Everything good in my life started from that moment." As the sun set over Dust Valley, June and Luke stood together on the porch of their sanctuary, watching as another woman walked up the path with her children, seeking the safety and hope that the Aid Society promised. Behind them, the house filled with the sounds of healing women sharing stories, children laughing, voices raised in song. The evening was interrupted by the sound of a horse approaching at full gallop. A young man dismounted quickly and approached the porch, hat in hand. "Mrs. Sawyer, I'm Tom Bradley from the telegraph office. Got an urgent message for you from the territorial governor." June took the telegram with trembling hands, afraid of what news it might contain. But as she read, her face lit up with joy. "What is it?" Luke asked. "The territorial legislature has passed a law requiring every county to establish aid societies for women and children in crisis. They're using our model as the template." June's voice was thick with emotion. "They want me to travel to Santa Fe to help train the coordinators." Luke smiled. "Sounds like your revolution is spreading." As Tom Bradley rode back to town, June reflected on how far they'd all come. Henry Greer had built an empire on the suffering of others, but it had crumbled in a single night. In its place, they had built something far more powerful, a community of survivors who refused to let fear win. Margaret Collins arrived for dinner as the last light faded from the sky. She looked healthier than June had ever seen her face free from the haunted expression that had once defined her. "I have news," Margaret announced as they gathered around the table. "The last of the trafficking routes has been shut down. From Kansas to California, The entire network is finished. A cheer went up from the women present. Alice Morrison raised her glass of cider. To the women who couldn't be here to celebrate with us, may they rest in peace, knowing their sacrifice meant something. And to the women who will never know their names, June added, but who will live in freedom because of their courage. As they sat around the table sharing stories and making plans for the future, June felt a profound sense of completion. Not an ending, but a transformation. The scared woman who had jumped from a train 6 months ago had become someone she barely recognized. A leader, a protector, a beacon of hope for others. Luke reached for her hand under the table, and June felt the familiar warmth of his touch. Their love had grown slowly, built on trust and mutual respect rather than passion and possession. It was the kind of love that would last, the kind that made both of them stronger. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "My mother," June replied. She used to say that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but choosing to do what's right, even when you're terrified. I never really understood what she meant until I jumped from that train. And now, June looked around the table at the faces of women who had become her family, at the children playing safely in the next room, at the letters on her desk from women she hadn't yet met but would help anyway. Now I know that courage is contagious. One person's brave choice can inspire another and another until the whole world changes. Years later, when historians wrote about the early days of women's rights in the Colorado Territory, they would note the impact of the Dust Valley Women's Aid Society and its founder, June Bennett Sawyer. They would document the legislation it inspired, the lives it saved, the network of similar organizations that spread across the American West. But they would never fully capture the quiet courage it took for one terrified woman to jump from a moving train into an uncertain future, or the love that had grown from that desperate act of faith. They couldn't measure the strength found in Alice Morrison's gentle guidance of other survivors, or the redemption Luke Sawyer discovered in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Some journeys begin with a single step. June's had begun with a leap into darkness, guided only by her mother's words about courage and the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, there had to be a better way to live. As she sat on her porch that evening, watching the stars emerge over the Colorado mountains, June knew she had found that better way, not just for herself, but for every woman who would walk through the doors of the Aid Society, seeking safety, hope, and the chance to discover her own courage. The revolution had begun with a single leap of faith. Now it would continue, one brave choice at a time, until every woman knew she deserved to live without fear. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley, not a sound of terror now, but of possibility. Of journeys, beginning of new lives, waiting to unfold, of courage, spreading like wildfire across the vast American frontier. June smiled and squeezed Luke's hand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women seeking help, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, surrounded by the family she had chosen and the community she had helped build, she was finally completely home.